We are slaying monsters.
Don't let the ghosts and the ghouls disturb you, darling.
Any deep thoughts that you want to bring to the table for the beginning of this episode here?
Just that I have the cutest little beast in the entire world sitting on my lap to help me get through this beastly episode.
And what beast is that?
I have a Zuri girl.
Oh.
She's so precious. She's licking my hand.
Zuri is actually more akin to, I think, the Beast of Exmoor, which was one of the British big cats.
Oh.
As opposed to the Beast of Bray Road, which is a large dog, or so we are led to believe.
The Beast of Exmoor was probably real, right? Since they have so many big cats in the UK right now.
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, the UK big cats is one of the most fascinating little subcategories of cryptozoology because, like, maybe like it's really logical, and we've talked in our Fortean roundups about how, you know, there was a time in the 60s where all of a sudden they outlawed exotic animals, as they should, but of course people didn't turn over their exotic animals, they just like released them to the wild. These stories keep coming out of, you know, these animals getting found in the wild, and somebody will just be like, oh yeah, we found a released lynx or something like that in the Scottish Highlands or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that seems like a much more realistic animal than Bray Road, which is maybe a werewolf, maybe a dog-headed person, as we call in cryptozoology a dogman. This is something, not to be overly progressive, but in all of the research that I was doing for this episode, everything referred to it as the dogman, the Minnesota dogman. And I'm like, why don't we have any dog women?
Why don't we?
Where are all the dog women? Actually, when I started searching for bipedal dog women, I got a lot of hits in Google, and they were surprising.
Oh, were they furries?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's all furries.
Yeah. Awesome.
I think we have to commend the Sasquatch and Patty, the Sasquatch that's captured by Patterson Gimlin on the film, for being like Bigfoot. You actually have this really good representation of the female cryptid there. Mm-hmm. But I feel like every other cryptid, they're always looking for male cryptids. And the dogman, I mean, it's even wrapped up in the name. It's the dogman, you know.
I don't know why it always defaults to man. It's also a very language oriented thing where if we don't know something, it tends to be classified as a man before it's classified as a woman. And I've never been able to figure out why that is, why we use that instead.
I think we're just a very male centric language culture. But
we're slaying monsters. We got Maddie J here.
Yo.
And I'm EJ. EJ. And we are talking about the Beast of Bray Road. Again. Part two, yeah. So this is our expose into the Beast of Bray Road and the Minnesota dog person. The Minnesota dog person. We're gonna introduce that. It's gonna be dog person, moth person, Loch Ness person. Don't call it a monster. I mean, really. We don't know what it is until we ask it. And we can't ask it because it's not real. Okay, continue.
Also because I'm not sure it can hear you.
It doesn't speak English.
I try to talk to fish all the time and they just never respond. So, yes, in our last episode, two Wisconsin women, Lori Andrezzi and Doris Gibson, they had independent, frightening encounters with strange creatures that resembled werewolves. Bipedal, hairy, shaggy, dog-headed humanoids along a dark roadside. Lori Andrezzi just drove by one, saw it was eating some roadkill, thought, hey, that's really weird. But Doris Gibson was actually, she thought that she ran over it. And then when she got out to look, she was chased by whatever this creature was.
Could have been a bear.
Could have been a bear. We'll get into some of the potential explanations for it in the future. But first, let's talk about how their stories, because it just, people see stuff along the roadside all the time. There's a lot of cars traveling the American back roads, So how did their story come to be national news, and how did it launch this whole cryptid that is now this? I mean, it's a massive footnote in cryptozoology. The Beast of Bray Road and dogman, dog person, is such a hot spot for cryptozoology, the research, this branch of study, because it's so strange. And so you have this whole subset of cryptozoologists that are like, this creature is crazy. It doesn't make any sense at all. You're taking resources and you're making us look basically like crazy occultists. We want to be studying what dinosaurs could possibly still be around. Is Sasquatch a undiscovered primate, something like that? We're trying to do real science here. And then you have a bunch of people that are like, no, this thing accounts for all the werewolf mythology throughout all of human history.
Two very different sides of the argument. Absolutely,
yes. And they exist in cryptozoology.
The thing about this one, I think, is that it seems quite realistic while also seeming quite unrealistic. It's like hard for me to wrap my brain around because, yes, dogs are out there. Big dogs are out there. Very realistic, fine. Maybe somebody just misinterpreted a big old dog, like a big old wild dog or coyote or wolf or whatever. And then on the other hand, it's bipedal. And it is humanoid, right?
Right.
So...
yeah, remember Lori Andrezzi, when she saw this thing on the roadside, it was crouched on its haunches, holding something to its mouth, like eating with its hands. That's not dog behavior, really.
That's not dog behavior.
And then the other problem is that we'll start to see in this episode, it gets wrapped up in Satanism. It gets wrapped up in this whole religious context that invalidates the supposed real science that cryptozoology is trying to do even more. The reports of these two women ended up on the desk of a cartoonist at a local paper called The Week. And you know these. This is one of those free papers that got weekly distribution and would feature local special interest stories. They're not really known for like hard-hitting journalistic exposés, right? But that didn't bother Linda Godfrey, who was an aspiring cartoonist and a humor writer. Now, she had been drawing cartoons for the paper for basically just pocket change, trying to build her career, make a little bit of money on the side. And eventually she got a job writing columns and features for the paper because she was, in her own words, just kind of around, So in December of 1991, another local journalist passed these stories to Godfrey. This other journalist had heard them from a bus driver who had heard the stories from the women directly. So we're talking like a bit of a transfer of information here, right?
Yeah.
Now, Godfrey agreed to check out these leads, kind of thinking, this is in my vein. Remember, she was a humor writer. She was a cartoonist.
This seems like a silly human interest story.
Yeah, she thought it was just going to be like a funny little story. People saw a werewolf by the side of the road, figured it was probably like Halloween, whatever, going to go by.
When did this happen?
The incidents?
Yeah.
The roadside incidents? Well, Lori Andrezzi's site was in the fall of 1989. And Doris Gibson's site was, I believe, in December of 1991.
Wow, they're very spread out now that you mention it. Okay.
Yeah, they are.
Okay.
Yeah, they are. But what happened was this bus driver heard these two stories and kind of put them together, thought that's weird, contacted a reporter that the bus driver knew, and that reporter had more of a name for themselves. I'm not sure we even know who that reporter was, but that reporter reached out to Linda Godfrey and was like, I don't want to cover this story, but I think this would be a good story for you.
Okay, take this trash story, please.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, also, the reporter cautioned her that this might have something to do with satanic activity. So that was the frame that Godfrey had coming into this.
How does a single or two sightings of a dog-like creature make somebody think of Satan?
I think because it was just so weird. It was so out of the ordinary.
I guess. Is this kind of during the Satanic Panic? I imagine.
This is on the heel. We're going to talk about this a little bit later in this episode. Mm-hmm. This was on the heels of the Satanic Panic.
Okay.
And there were, at the time, all these reports of mutilated animal carcasses being found along the sides of the road that they believed were animals that had been the victims of satanic sacrifice.
Oh, okay.
And so the reporter who brought this to Godfrey, I suspect, thought this is really weird, but it kind of, we're talking about carcasses along the road. We're talking about perhaps some satanic cult activity going on here in the Midwest. They thought maybe they were connected.
Okay. Yeah.
And Lori Andrezzi actually said that she thought that the creature was satanic. So anyway, Godfrey followed up with the bus driver, and after that was connected to John Fredrickson, who was exactly the right person to talk to. He was the local animal control officer. She expected him to dismiss the whole thing and just kind of be like, okay, there you go, the end. But, it's kind of in the humor columnist to be like, oh, I went to talk to the dog catcher, and the dog catcher said he hadn't caught any werewolves, right? That's kind of what she expected from him. But instead, she got to his office, and he walked her in, sat her down, and pulled out this file. And he hands her this file, and it's labeled werewolf.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, so the animal control officer has this werewolf file that he hands her, and it contained all the sightings of strange animals that had been seen on and around Bray Road. Now, to his credit, Fredrickson believed that the animal was actually a large coyote. But there had been enough reports for Godfrey to start taking them a little bit more seriously. Seemed like there was something going on here. So she made arrangements to interview Lori Andrezzi and Doris Gibson. Both of the girls seemed sincere, and neither gave Godfrey the impression that they were trying to get attention or pull a prank on her or anything like that. And, Doris Gibson had just had her sighting, but Lori Andrezzi's was 2 years ago. She saw something, she talked about it sometimes, but for the most part, she was just living her life, normal day-to-day existence.
She was the one that just saw it out of the car, right?
Yeah, okay. Saw it. It was chowing down on some roadkill. Based off her interviews with these witnesses, Godfrey drew a cartoon interpretation of the beast. This image of a kneeling werewolf clutching bleeding flesh and staring at the viewer became the iconic image of the monster. Andrezzi actually confirmed in the most Dead Files way and said, this is exactly what I saw. This is it. This is what it looked like. EJ, let me show you that image.
She's a great artist.
Yeah, she's really good.
Yeah.
She did admit, Godfrey admitted that she added the full moon in the background for dramatic effect.
I love it. I love the tree too.
I know, it's so great, right?
It's great.
Yeah.
Wow.
These interviews were just the tip of the iceberg, though. Godfrey was quickly connected to another teenager, Heather Bowie, who lived near Bray Road. And that previous December, while sledding with friends, Bowie had seen a strange-looking coyote-like creature. Her mother recalled the day in a phone interview, saying, she thought it looked like a big dog until it stood up. We said, what do you mean stood up? She wanted us to go down there, but we just blew it off.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so there was the big dog that just stood up She ran to her parents and was like, this dog just stood up. Will you go look at it? And her parents were like, nah. So Heather claimed that the beast ran away with a bounding leap and just disappeared off into the cornfield. It's really hard to know what to make of that, you know?
Is.
We've talked in the past about how incredibly unreliable eyewitness testimony can be. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus, get used to her name, is one of the most eminent researchers on memory and has made a career of helping to shed light on how fragile memory is and how outside influence can kind of reshape what we think we saw. She said, many people believe that memory works like a recording device. You just record information, then you can call it up and play it back when you want to answer a question or identify images. But decades of work in psychology has shown that this just isn't the case. Our memories are constructive. They're reconstructive. Memory works a little bit more like a Wikipedia page. You can go in there and change it, but so can other people.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So, without knowing how carefully Godfrey conducted her interview with young Heather Bowie, or how much influence the girl's mother might have had on her initial statement, it's hard to take much from this report. She might have seen a massive dog-headed human, or she might have simply caught sight of a coyote or stray dog bounding through the woods. Or it might have been her imagination and her fears reinforced by the adults who she trusted.
It's so hard to say when with these kinds of things. I saw a bear run across the field at my house when I was a teenager, and it was, I was convinced for many years that it was a Sasquatch.
Right.
Because of the way that it sort of, it moved more like a gorilla.
Okay, yeah.
But it was running through a swamp. So it wasn't comfortable where it was probably hitting pockets of deep water, shallow water, solid ground. And it looked like it was distressed.
Yeah.
So when you're getting witness testimony, maybe the witness hasn't accounted for the different environmental factors around the thing that they saw.
Absolutely. Also, the way bears run is weird.
They barrel.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They're not graceful. They're very lopey, you know?
Yeah, they're lopey and especially in a bad condition, they're going to be lopier. And,
Yeah.
And it is how you would imagine an ape to move, I would say. Because apes are definitely like...
Yeah, I mean, that's
graceful.
really fascinating. Yeah. And I think that a lot of people haven't seen bears in the wild. They're extremely rare. So maybe, you know? Also, the animal control officer, John Fredrickson, he thought that a lot of these reports were probably from dogs that were jumping. And people saw the dogs jumping and it looked like the dogs were moving on their hind legs. Because if you think about it, say you see a dog in foliage or high grass or something like that. You see it like jump, see head, maybe upper torso, and then it disappears, and then head, upper torso, then it disappears. And you might think, oh, that's a dog-headed creature moving and I keep losing sight of it, but it's actually a dog jumping up and down, you know, bounding up and down.
Yeah, like it looks like it's running if you're only seeing the top.
Right. That was John Fredrickson's theory for
And
all of this.
Does rabies play a role in this at all? Strange animal behavior?
Not that I am aware of.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of. If you want to link it to a disease, it probably ends up being linked to mange. Because mange has weird patchy hair and sort of a gaunt appearance and stuff like that. But we will come back to that a little later, actually in the next episode.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, for now, Godfrey wrote up her findings and she published them in the week along with her sketch of the beast. She and the newspaper just kind of assumed that it would, this is an interesting weekend read and it's going to blow over in a couple of days, right? Shrugged it off. But it didn't. Instead, the week's offices found themselves flooded with calls. Some came from other news outlets who had caught wind of the story and wanted to know more about what they were calling the Beast of Bray Road. Others came from residents who had seen something strange and wanted to report their own sightings. Suddenly, any animal in Elkhorn was being reported as a werewolf, from stray dogs to coyotes to raccoons. The reporting stirred a kind of reverence in the town, too. Bakeries started offering werewolf cookies. Aww. Restaurants served up the Silver Bullet special.
Oh my God.
And cutout werewolves dotted the roadsides for months. The Beast of Bray Road was good for business in Elkhorn. And it's important to realize, I think, that most of this was done as an inside joke. We've seen small town monster stories become kind of satirical before. Take the Lizard Man of Skateboard Swamp, which became this roadside tourist attraction.
It does sound like it's becoming like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have the, what's the Lizard Man Stomp celebration every year, I think about the Centennial Sasquatch Hunt at Harrison Hot Springs, where they offered a prize for anyone who could bring the creature back alive or with tongue in cheek. Small town urban legends, they have this way of building a community and an identity for these places. They have their own thing that they can rally behind. Andrew Neumer this is fascinating, an epidemiologist and population health scientist. It's quite a career for somebody. And he models the spread of urban legends using infectious diseases as a blueprint. So think about this. It's the way that urban legends spread and disseminate throughout a population. He equates very similar to the way an infectious disease spreads.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, word of mouth kind of equates to person contact, right? So even after the original speaker has become skeptical or immune, it continues to spread.
And also belief systems, behavior, fear. It all plays in that way, like a disease.
In his model, immunity is built either through skepticism or education. So you can become naturally immune or skeptical, or you can develop immunity through learning the truth or being educated about the legend or something like that. And eventually, you can reach a herd immunity, which causes the rumor to just kind of burn out.
That is a great analogy.
I know, I think it's incredible, right? It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, it's actually what happened with werewolves back in the 1700s. We had this, first there's this little idea of the werewolf, and then it starts to disseminate. And then as science comes in, as understanding of biology comes in, we begin to immunize each other against this belief of werewolves. And eventually that idea of werewolves burns out like a disease. And then all of a sudden we've sort of reached a herd immunity for the belief of werewolves.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm reading a book called The Dancing Plague, which might or might not become a future episode.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, it might. The book won't become an episode, but the story behind it might become an episode one day. And the people who were plagued by this and the people around it who were affected really relied heavily on their saints to help them. Different saints had different things. I think we were talking about this with Katie during the Fortean Roundup. What saints were the saints of what thing? Like brewers, mothers, things like that. And it's interesting because many of these people in this culture put so much stock in what the saints could do for them. But you don't really hear that anymore. So that's another one of those things where it's a strange little offshoot of Christianity where people put so much faith in these almost like polytheistic little deities. And you don't hear about that so much anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of fallen by the wayside, right?
Yeah, it's just kind of everywhere. I mean, you could find a million examples of this, but that's just what's top of mind for me right now.
Totally. The problem when you're talking about urban legends, as opposed to infectious disease, is that the infected person is often unwilling to be inoculated. Urban legends, they tickle a very particular part of the human brain. And as we're seeing in Elkhorn here, they create a community built around a commonality, a belief in a particular thing. It binds people together. And because that belief is not mainstream, or like might be considered under assault by skeptics, the bond between these people becomes even stronger because they have to have each other in order to fight back against the people that don't believe them, don't trust them, you know?
Well, it becomes an identity. And then it's even harder to break free.
Yeah. When you have a small town like Elkhorn that already has these kind of small town community bonds, and you inject this fresh new commonality into it, the bonds become stronger and stronger, and they actually form this very deep identity exactly for that community. And that is how Elkhorn became ground zero for the dogman, dog person. And so all of a sudden, Linda Godfrey was inundated by these reports. Big tracks were reported near a feed mill on Potter's Road the previous year. But they had been made in the snow, and now they were gone. There was no evidence of it. Now, the witnesses said, oh yeah, they were bigger than a domestic dog. They had these really long claws. But we don't have any evidence, you know? And it's worth pointing out that snowmelt can affect the size of tracks, makes it hard to determine the actual size of the prints if, you know, they were large or not. Other eyewitnesses came forward, often with stories very similar to the initial reports. Another teenager, Tom Brichta, claimed to have hit the beast with his car, just like Doris Gibson. In 1992, while driving home from a wedding reception, he thought he hit a mailbox. He backed up to check it out, only to see a massive, hairy creature which took a swipe at his car. He described it. I saw just a faint shadow of actually how big it was. I didn't get any facial details, but the lower part of its body I can describe to a T. It had large legs. The feet were a little fuzzy. The fingers were either pointed or had long nails on them. The arm was kind of long and odd-shaped.
Wow, sounds like a werewolf.
I know, right? It really does. Allegedly, the animal scratched up the side of his car, tearing some of the pinstriping paint off of it. Brichta was only 17 at the time, and he claimed he hadn't been drinking at the wedding reception. He also told Godfrey that his family owned a cabin, quote, up north, whatever that means, and he had seen bears and wolves before, but this creature didn't look like either of them.
Was his car still damaged? Could they take a look at it?
I did not see any evidence of damage on his car. Like there wasn't any evidence of his car at all.
Okay.
Yeah. But remember that he claimed he saw, quote, just a faint shadow of how big it actually was. And initially he thought he hit a mailbox, which would actually explain the missing paint and the scratch on his car. It wasn't until after his encounter that his mother reminded him of Doris Gibson and her run-in with the dog creature on the road. And that's when he decided to report his sighting to Godfrey. But that's what we see time and time again with the Beast of Bray Road here. It's this post hoc reporting. Somebody saw something, they chalked it up and said, man, that's weird. Then later on, they hear about the dogman, they hear about the Beast of Bray Road, and they say, oh, weird, maybe that's what I saw. I'm going to contact this reporter and have an interview.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that happening. I feel like he had to have seen something, though, like this particular guy. Like, I feel like, because he said that he saw claws, he saw a hand and an arm. But yes, I do know what you mean, though. There's plenty of that.
Yeah,
plenty of that post-hoc.
But it's really hard to say. I mean, he could have seen a bear.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things, not to jump ahead too much, one of the explanations that gets put forth for the Beast of Bray Road a lot is a bear with mange. Because as we talked about, it's, you know, you're hairless, that it can be kind of spotty. They tend to be very gaunt, very skinny. They look weird. Like like, you don't really see hairless bears, even if you've seen a bunch of bears.
Right.
You know, and that would have the long claws, or what he calls the pointed fingers, or the long claws of the beast if it saw him. It would also, you know, if you hit a bear that has mange, it's already a little out of sorts, would totally expect an aggressive response to that.
Yes.
Just to reiterate, he may have had an experience on the roadside, but we don't know what he saw. This is all just speculation that we're going through. But once he started filtering it through the Beast of Bray Road story, he and Linda Godfrey started making these connections. They were looking for those similarities. That's the post hoc reasoning. And his encounter became a beast story. It wasn't a beast story initially, but it became a beast story. He had become infected, if you will, with the urban legend, if you're following that epidemiological model. Mm-hmm. And not all the reports were as convincing as his either. Godfrey interviewed Scott Bray, the Bray of Bray Road, who was a carpenter and claimed to have seen a large German shepherd or coyote on his property. But it's also worth pointing out that it took a lot of coaxing for him to come forward, because for over a year, he just thought he saw a sick coyote.
Wow, and that could have been all that it was.
Yeah. In a 1992 interview, he said, quote, "In all honesty, I never thought it was the same thing everyone else were seeing. I never took it seriously, and I don't now either. I still wish this would just all go away."
Oh, man, yeah. Because he's probably getting a lot of, like, activity on his road now. And like,
oh, yeah. Yeah, there are people all over.
And putting like wooden things up,
Oh, yeah, they were doing you know those, like, cutouts that you put at the side of the road? Yeah, they had, like, these big werewolves on the side of the road and stuff, yeah.
I wouldn't like that either on my road.
Bray only linked his sighting with the beast because Godfrey made the connection for him. And she did this again and again and again as reports came in. Basically, if anybody saw anything on the roadside near Elkhorn, Godfrey considered it a possible sighting of the beast. Take witness Mike Etten, who saw something crouching on the road in March of 1990. He reported to her, "I saw a dark-haired creature, bigger than a dog, a coyote, or a wolf, sitting like a raccoon sits. I could only see it for 2 seconds, but it was nice bright moonlight, so I could see it real good."
You know who sits like raccoons?
Raccoons.
Bears.
Bears. Absolutely. Yeah, kind of on the haunches again, right? And it's funny because his sighting is identical to Lori Andrezzi's, all the way down to the way it's sitting on its haunches like that, right? Raccoon-like. Which could imply that it's a real animal. Maybe we are looking for that bear again, because it has this repeat behavior, you know? But later in the interview, Etten admitted to drinking and driving impaired, although he claimed, quote, "not impaired enough to see clearly or maneuver my car."
So he was an expert. An expert at drunk driving.
A professional, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And look, I mean, everyone makes foolish choices sometimes. But I'm not sure we should put too much stock in a report from someone who's been drinking and had only seen something on a dark roadside for 2 seconds by his own account.
Yeah, that's tough. I would have a tough time buying it even if he was completely sober, because, I mean, that's not a lot of time and it's dark and, yeah, nothing to do with the drinking, really. It's really just about the nighttime and how quickly he saw it.
Yeah, and you know, given how many details his story shares with Lori Andrezzi's, it seems much more likely that either Etten or Godfrey kind of fleshed out the details with similarities from the original sighting. That's the post hoc reporting again, where you're like, okay, I saw this thing, and then you're missing, there's some gaps in your story, and so you fill it in with parts of a story that you already know.
Yeah, it's like wildfire. You can't get the data in a silo. It's just out there, so...
Yeah. Now, the most surprising story to come across Godfrey's desk implied that the dogman, dog person, may have been around much, much longer than she initially thought. This story was reported to Godfrey in 1992, but the sighting actually happened way back in 1936. This reporting was technically third-hand, too. The witness was Mark Shackleman, who told his son Joe in the 1950s, and Joe told Godfrey in the early 90s. I'm sure I don't have to point out how that's an issue, what with the 60-year differential and the fact that the original witness wasn't even alive anymore. But either way, the story goes like this. Mark Shackleman worked as a night watchman at St. Coletta, a Catholic convent. This is about 40 miles or so north of the Bray Road sightings near Jefferson, Wisconsin. This convent, by the way, is super creepy to begin with. It's a sprawling school. It's the Federalist style. So you're talking massive buildings. They got the like pointed eaves and those big windows, but those windows that like they always look empty no matter what. Like the whole place just looks, even when it was in operation, it looked empty. It's exactly like the kind of sanitarium that you would expect to see on a ghost hunting show.
Except it's not a sanitarium. Oh, you mean like it would be like a sanitarium?
No, like a sanitarium. Yeah, it wasn't a sanitarium. Okay. No, it was a Catholic convent. Although a few years later after his sighting, it would house Rosemary Kennedy after her lobotomy.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that was the place?
Yeah, that was the place.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So that can kind of give you an idea of what this place was like, you know?
Oh, poor Rosemary Kennedy.
I know. It's a really sad story.
It's tragic.
Talk about a misunderstanding of how the brain works.
Oh, my God. Unbelievable. Yeah, if you guys want to have some sad times and you've never heard of what happened to Rosemary Kennedy, just do a little research and learn all about it.
One night, while doing his rounds on the convent's grounds, Shackleman came upon a terrifying creature. He described it. It was covered with dark or black hair, gave off a bad odor like long dead meat. Eyes looked right into me, and it made a sound. It was a 3-syllable growl, low and mean, something like Gadara, with the accent on the second syllable. Gadara.
Like King Ghidorah?
Oh, no, not like King. Although maybe. King Ghidorah, of course, the 3-headed golden dragon that is a bitter rival of Godzilla.
Could this be King Ghidorah the entire time?
What if it was?
New theory. New hot take.
So this creature, whatever it was crouched atop a Native American burial mound. And it was using clawed hands with, he said, stumpy thumbs to scratch at the ground as if it was digging into the burial mound. Shackleman fled in fear. I mean, obviously, right? That's fucking terrifying. When he returned the following day, he claimed to find 3 scratch marks on the ground, matching the creature's clawed hands or paws. And of course, anyone from our ghost hunting experience will tell you that 3 scratches or 3 anything is a mocking of the Trinity. Again, we're binding this to a religious connotation here.
Are we going to get into what Ghidorah could mean?
Yes, it's not Ghidorah. Ghidorah is Godzilla's foe.
That's Godzilla. Okay.
I'm wearing my Godzilla -1 T-shirt
yes,
today, appropriately.
Looks great.
But no, it's Ghidorah.
Ghidorah.
Yeah,
okay.
If you were to write it out, it would be Gadarrah.
Okay.
Ghidorah.
Okay.
Despite initially having a lot of fear from this thing, Shackleman was kind of a badass. And he returned to the burial mound the following night with a large flashlight. And again, he found the creature there digging. So he tried to shoo it away, but it didn't run. Instead, it stood up on its hind legs. He claimed it was well over 6 feet tall, terrifying, fierce, and angry. Realizing that he was woefully unprepared with just his flashlight, Shackleman did the only thing he could. He prayed to God to save him. At this, the creature snarled and turned away before loping off into the darkness. He whispered another prayer of thanks and hoped that he would never encounter the thing again. And he never did.
Oh boy.
He would later tell his son, "That damn thing came straight out of hell. Maybe my prayer sent it back. I bet it didn't stay there."
That's so cool. But there you go. There's the religion coming in again.
Exactly, right?
All right.
To strengthen that religious bond even more, Linda Godfrey drew a connection between Shackleman's creature's vocalization, Gadara, and the biblical Gadara, Gadara. Do you remember this from your time in Catholicism, EJ?
It was a dark and muddy time.
Okay.
No.
Well, you might remember the story. Okay. So that was an ancient city in Jordan where Jesus found a possessed man who lived in the nearby tombs. Allegedly, the man was so strong that he couldn't be bound by any mortal chains. And when Jesus asked him, "Dude, what's up?" the man responded, "I am Legion, for we are many." Jesus,
that's where that came from.
Yep.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Badass line.
Yeah. Jesus took it upon himself to exorcise the demon from the man, which he sent into a herd of nearby pigs, who subsequently leapt off a cliff into the ocean. The possessed man was freed from his demon, and all it cost was like 1,000 pigs.
Oh, just 1,000 pigs.
Yeah, whatever.
It's okay. They have like the intelligence of dogs, but that's fine.
Not like anybody was like...
They're smarter than dogs.
Not like anybody was relying on those pigs to, feed their family or anything like that either.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I guess I never knew that story, but I knew the phrase. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So biblical scholars, I did a little research into this story itself because it's interesting. Biblical scholars are kind of divided on the meaning of this story. Okay. You have Thomas Aquinas, who believed that it was an allegorical example of Jesus valuing men's souls above animals and material bodies. But that's kind of an older take on it. A more modern reading comes from the Church of England's Bishop John Austin Baker, who draws a comparison between the pigs and unclean people. And in his interpretation, Jesus didn't send the demons into the pigs, but merely allowed the demons to seek out a more viable host, one which was disgusting and unsanitary.
That's not nice about pigs.
Pigs are actually very clean animals, or they can be very clean animals.
They can be, but I have taken care of some pigs, and they are very dirty. But they're sweet.
The pigs may also have represented the Roman army, where possession is the gluttonous conquest of the pigs, or the victims of war, and their demise shows how the Romans' hedonistic ways will be their inevitable downfall. Regardless, Godfrey's connection between Mark Shackleman's dogman sighting and some suicidal pigs in the Bible is, I'd say, tenuous at best. But it's not the only time she links the dogman and Satan. In a later interview with Laurie Andrezzi, Godfrey quotes her on her own sighting. She says, "To this day, I believe it was satanic. The dogman, the Beast of Bray Road, was satanic." And it's no real surprise that Satanism was in the minds of the public. As we discussed, America was still recovering from the hangover that was the Satanic Panic, a moral hysteria in the 1980s. Spawned by fears of ritual abuse in public schools, conducted by nefarious cults, or so they said. This was largely discredited by the mid-1990s because there was no fucking evidence at all, but it is still, I think, one of the most important moments in Western culture. It all started with Michelle Smith and her psychologist Lawrence Pazder. In the 1970s, Pazder started treating Smith for depression following a miscarriage, which would normally be fine, except Pazder used hypnosis and memory regression on Smith, two ineffective and fundamentally flawed techniques in modern psychology. Essentially, again, the idea of memory regression is that the intact memories we have are buried somewhere in the person's brain, locked away and inaccessible. Like you have these memories, but you can't get to them, right? They can be accessed if we're able to break through the psychological barriers surrounding them and bring them back to the surface, and then they can be replayed like a normal memory. That was the theory. And this was the theory from like probably the 1950s to the late 1980s. But it's not true at all. And it isn't the way the brain functions at all. Once again, I'm going to bring up psychologist Elizabeth Loftus, who has spoken very extensively on memory regression and its total lack of scientific basis. In the 90s, in response to the tidal wave of memory regression bullshit, she and her colleagues conducted a study where they intentionally planted false memories in subjects' minds. So what they did is they took these subjects and they implanted this memory that they had gotten lost in a shopping mall as a child. And then they claimed to draw this memory out of the subjects and put them back in that like traumatic psychological place when they were lost as a child.
And it worked, didn't it?
And it worked.
Yeah.
And these people were placed in this emotional state that they had never actually been in. And they did it for multiple people.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. They're not real. They're totally made up memories. And they were the same across multiple subjects. Loftus sums it up beautifully in one of my favorite quotes. You can plant entire events into the minds of otherwise ordinary, healthy people. The emotion is no guarantee that you are dealing with an authentic memory.
That is really fascinating.
Yeah. It's actually, what was the Elizabeth Olsen murder series? Love and Death. Love and Death. It's one of the big kind of question marks in her case too, I believe.
What was the question mark?
Because they used memory regression on her to help get her acquitted.
Oh, I remember that. And it sounded very it was very realistic. Like it seemed very effective. Okay.
Yeah, but there's this big debate over whether was that real or not. So this explains why Michelle Smith's session at Pazder's Hand often ended up with half-hour screaming sessions as he implanted false memories of sexual abuse into this poor woman's psyche. And why, you may ask, were satanic cults conducting this abuse? Do you know why? Do you want to take a guess why?
I mean, all I can think is this guy had an agenda. There's just this crazy agenda going on.
Oh, yeah. He was a devout Catholic. Devout enough that he convinced Michelle Smith to travel to the Vatican to be baptized. And while there, he convinced the Vatican to open an investigation into these insane claims based on no evidence at all.
And did they do it? They did it, didn't they?
Oh, they fucking did it. Yeah, they fucking did it. That escalated so far by the mid-'80s that the church was convinced that there was a sinister cabal of Satan worshippers entrenched in America's public schools, which was stealing children and forcing them into prostitution and human sacrifice, based on no evidence at all.
Wow.
I cannot stress this enough. The only evidence presented in Michelle Remembers is the hypnotic regressions, which, as we've said time and time again, are known to be bullshit.
That is interesting, and I wonder if... So my great-uncle was a bishop in the Catholic Church.
Right, yeah.
And I just wonder if he believed in any of this, because he was a bishop around that time. I mean, he was a bishop for a long time, but around that time, he was like... living in the Vatican, he was living, he was... I
mean, he had to at least be in the circle of this, right?
Yeah, I have to ask my family if they ever talked to him about this, if he ever had a
I would love to know what he thought, because at least from the stories that we've heard about him, it seemed like he had a pretty reasonable head on his shoulders when came to like... just judging the facts in front of him. So I'd be very interested to know where he fell on this, if we know.
Yeah, I'd like to know too. Yeah. I'll ask around.
So the other evidence that these assholes used, who were conducting these essentially modern day witch hunts, were interviews with children, which is all well and good, except they had absolutely zero understanding of child psychology. By asking leading questions and rewarding certain responses, the interviewers again planted false memories in these children. The poor kids, they just wanted to please the adults. So questions like, does someone here tell you to worship the devil, become very loaded. If the child says yes, the adults get really excited, and the child thinks, oh, I did a good thing. I should keep telling them things like this, because that's what they want to hear.
And I'll tell you, all those kids actually really did end up down in New York City after that, running their own improv shows. So
yeah, it's all yes and, right? It basically is.
They ended up being very successful. So it was a happy ending in the end. It's a very happy ending.
It was not a happy ending.
It was not a happy ending at all. But it's interesting because I try to put myself there as a kid, and I was extremely imaginative, and I was very improv based. Like, I loved making shit up. I would have been that kid that just ruined lives for fun. I've not known.
I've told this story on the show before, but when I was a kid, we're talking probably, I want to say like 1989. So like the very tail end of the Satanic Panic, right? Mm-hmm. I had, I was a kid. I was getting into trouble. I had bruised myself or cut myself in some way. I don't know. There was some mark on me. And one of the teachers at my preschool sat me down and was like, hey, how did you get that mark? And I said that my mom threw me against the wall. Mm-hmm. And it was not true. Like, it was something that I just completely made up because I was an imaginative kid. But they brought my parents in for a conference and were like, hey, so this is what Matt said. And luckily they knew me and they knew my parents well enough to not do that. But I can see how if you didn't, or if you were more inclined to want to build this narrative of abusive parents or something like that, you could have absolutely done that. I was almost one of these kids.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that has little moments like that. Satanic Panic aside, little moments of kids just being imaginative and lying and slipping up have ruined people's lives.
Oh yeah.
This is just my conclusion. Children are evil. Children are Satan. I'm just kidding. But yes, it's that's very scary what can happen.
One of my favorite accounts of the Satanic Panic, and I think we've talked about this before too, comes from the McMartin preschool trial, where children swore that there was a network of hidden tunnels under their school accessed by, seriously, getting flushed down the toilet. So they would be flushed down the toilet into these catacombs. While in the catacombs, they participated in all sorts of like murder and ritual sacrifice and satanic worship and all that stuff before they were cleaned up and they were returned to their parents. And the cherry on top of this is when they were asked to identify who led the rituals, several children pointed to a picture of Chuck Norris.
That is wonderful. So Chuck Norris was going to this little preschool and shoving kids down toilets.
Yeah, that's what they get. That's what they said. That's where these interviews got to.
You know what I would if I would have believed it if they had said that Chuck Norris roundhouse kicked me into the toilet.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he wouldn't shove you down there.
No. He would roundhouse kick in the tightest jeans possible.
Yeah, in his Walker hat. Oh, this was pre-Walker. So he didn't have his like Walker hat yet. This is probably still Way of the Dragon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, he was kicking a lot back then, so.
None of that was real, by the way.
What?
None of it was real. It's very painfully obvious that it's not. Man. But it was enough to convince the church that Satanism was on the rise. They struck back and took a very hardline stance against anything even vaguely satanic, from punk and metal music to fantasy books and role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons. And here's where our story connects. Because in a bizarre coincidence, Elkhorn was actually ground zero for something other than the dogman. They were the battleground for the church's fight against D&D.
This is crazy.
In the 20th century, tabletop war games had become kind of a popular pastime for lovers of history, adventure. Many of them were based on actual conflict or historical armies, like the Napoleonic Wars. But by the early 1970s, there was this new kind of war game that had appeared on the scene, piloted by Gary Gygax out of his local horticulture hall in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Dungeons and Dragons. Combine the mechanics of tabletop war games with medieval fantasy literature. This new magical adventure took the gaming world by storm, obviously. I mean, you talk RPGs, that is the RPGs, the seminal RPG, right?
It's interesting how that took off back in the, what was it, like the 70s then?
Yeah, 1970s was when it started.
We didn't have the internet, obviously, so I just wonder how some guy in a horticultural hall in the 70s could have gotten a thing like that to catch on with such popularity.
But the games were popular. I think
but not that one yet.
Yeah, but it was also pre-video games.
Oh, wow, I guess it was.
You know, so before you have video games, you have this, and it's a social experience, and, you know, it's just a fun thing that people do.
I mean, I'm not arguing it. I guess I just don't know how it became so widespread so quickly.
I think he hit at a very particular time where Lord of the Rings had... It hadn't just come out, but it was relatively new and gaining in popularity. There was a Lord of the Rings movie, I want to say, in the 1970s. Let me see if that's true.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there was a Lord of the Rings movie in 1978 that helped to bring it into, like, the public consciousness. And it just kind of... I think it was just one of those right place, right time things. Fantasy was big at the time.
Well, the 70s for sure. Like, they had, I think, Excalibur was in the 70s.
That's like 82, I want to say, something like that. But yeah, right. So right about the same time.
But those fantasy novels and movies and high fantasy was getting really popular.
Very popular. Yeah, very popular. And so Dungeons and Dragons came on the scene and expounded on this moving models and rolling dice. And they brought character building and these role play elements to it as well. So for the first time, you could live out life as your spellcasting elf wizard or a half-orc barbarian or half-demon banjo player. And players could enact fantasy scenarios like fighting evil necromancers or stealing from dragons or having a steady income and being able to afford nice clothes in this economy.
What a wonderful fantasy.
Anyone who knows anything about D&D knows that the average session, well, you know, it might involve combat with demons or the forces of darkness. More often than not, they tend to involve very deep explorations of small-town politics and many, many dick jokes. D&D quickly became a fun activity for groups of people who wanted to just turn off reality and play as their favorite Lord of the Rings character for a little while.
It got us through the pandemic.
Oh, it did. Yeah, I mean, I ran a campaign for 2 years during the pandemic online.
Yeah, and it was continuous.
Yeah,
we did not miss.
We did not
hardly ever missed a week.
We didn't miss a week. Yeah. So the Vatican, understanding absolutely nothing about D&D, saw the art on the box and decided that dragons equal Satan. And worried that D&D players were engaging in dark summoning rituals instead of buying jars of endless mayonnaise, the church struck back and declared that D&D was a satanic enterprise. Now, I will say it didn't help that there were 2 suicides linked to D&D in the early 80s, which is to say that 2 young men took their own lives and they had played D&D in the past. But with fears of insular satanic cults in schools, thanks to the bullshit that was brought by Michelle Remembers and the McMartin preschool trials, D&D became demonized alongside it.
But they weren't connected. They were only connected in the sense that they played D&D.
Right.
So that's like saying, like, anybody who commits suicide but also has played soccer in the past, you can connect soccer and suicide.
You could say almost anything.
Yeah.
And if you eat a cheeseburger, you'll commit suicide. It's all nothing. They made the connection because it was convenient for them to make the connection.
Post hoc reasoning?
Yes, exactly.
As you said,
Once
yes.
again. Mm-hmm. To add even more fuel onto this occult flame, a 1991 Milwaukee Sentinel article bore the title, Pets Mutilated Cult Activity Suspected in Lynn. According to local animal control officer John Fredrickson, multiple mutilated dogs and cat carcasses had been found discarded along the roadside. You remember this guy. He's the same one that gave Linda Godfrey the werewolf file. Mm-hmm. Now, Lynn is just 10 miles south of Bray Road. So Linda Godfrey also investigated this story, curious if it had any link to the beast. But when she talked to John Fredrickson, he revealed the truth. Most of these animals were the results of illegal dogfighting, which was a very serious problem in the area at the time. So unless the cults were sacrificing these animals in the ring, that kind of closes the book on that theory.
So dogfighting ring.
Yeah.
But they said that they also found cats.
Yeah.
Probably stray cats that got hit by cars.
They could be. They could also be cats that were just, people leave pets along the road all the time. The dogfighting ring is one of the explanations that he gave to explain the pets. The other one was stray pets.
Pets that were allowed to run rampant and got hit by cars.
Right.
The amount of cats, particularly that I see along the side of the road when we're driving, is not
I know, it's
low.
really a shame.
So leave your cats indoors. That's my
should.
PSA.
You should. They're also going to slaughter birds.
They're
leave
responsible
them
for
outside.
killing billions of native wild birds in this country, and billions, and you're putting them in danger if you leave them outside.
Yeah, there's actually a really wonderful infographic from the Oatmeal about how murderous cats are.
And it's true.
It's true.
They're very murderous.
Yeah, it's true. It's billions of birds.
And they get murdered. So please leave them in your house.
Anywhere.
Okay.
So these animal carcasses by the roadside might also explain why the alleged beast, whatever it was, could frequently be seen dining on roadside kills. If you have extra animal corpses being thrown close to the road, scavengers are going to go there and they're going to eat them. But so think about this, right? You have this culture that's gone through a moral panic where everyone is terrified about Satan-worshipping cults hidden in the shadows. Lake Geneva, the origin of one of these alleged satanic practices, is just 10 miles from Elkhorn. Suspected animal sacrificing cults in the news. You've got a population primed to be afraid of demonic monsters, and suddenly people start reporting a werewolf or a dog-headed humanoid on the roadside at night. No wonder Satan was the first explanation.
It makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Now, it's worth pointing out that there is a very real medical condition called lycanthropy.
I think you might have explained it to me before.
Yeah, lycanthropy is real. It's
Yeah.
actually a body dysmorphia psychosis where a person believes that they are a lycanthrope and that they turn into an animal at various times.
Okay, so it's not like a physiological condition of like hair growth or something, which is a thing.
Hypertrichiosis.
That's what I
Yeah.
was thinking.
That's where people will grow hair all over their bodies.
Yeah, I thought that's
Yeah.
what you were referring to. Okay, so lycanthropy is more of a psychological condition.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, this is people who believe that they turn into animals. They often fully assume the personality of the animal, going so far as to walk on all fours or make movements similar to the animal's physicalities.
This is interesting because remember when we were watching that Ghost Adventures episode a million years ago and Zach had interviewed a guy. He was either in South America or Central America, and they were researching werewolf sightings in that area. And the guy said, or maybe it wasn't Zach. Oh no, it was.
If it's South America, it's probably not Ghost Adventures.
Who's
Is that Josh Gates?
Yes, thank you.
One of
It
the
was
like
Josh
Expedition
Gates.
Unknown or something.
Yes, Josh Gates. And so he ran into this guy. He was interviewing this guy, and he said, "I'm a werewolf," and he's like, "I will change right now in front of you." And then Josh said, "Okay, sure." And they filmed him.
Yeah.
And he went through a transformation.
Yeah.
But he was acting very much like a werewolf. But obviously there was no transformation, but he became a werewolf in his mind. And I think that he probably has that same psychological condition.
Exactly. I don't remember that episode offhand. It would be cool to try to find that, rewatch that.
It was deeply awkward. It was so awkward. I felt so bad for everybody because it was like he really did it. He went through it.
Yeah, he believed it. Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, he may very well have had lycanthropy.
Maybe, yeah.
To armchair diagnose him.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I can't say.
But yeah, it's a psychotic disorder. It's linked with body dysmorphia, and they actually treat it with antipsychotic medication.
Wow.
Now, as you said, there's also that hypertrichiosis, which is a condition where you grow hair all over your body. That is not linked to any of these kind of unusual behaviors or anything like that. But the people who go through that actually do look quite a bit like the Hollywood interpretation of a werewolf.
Mm-hmm. And I believe it's genetic. And I also believe that if you were to try to get rid of the hair, it just grows back worse.
I believe that's true, yes.
So there's really not much you can do. To my knowledge, I mean, maybe they've gotten some new stuff, but I don't know.
Now, there's also Greek writings of a race of dog-headed humanoids who were called the cynocephalus, that literally means dog-headed. It's widely assumed that these were actually misidentified baboons taken from accounts of travelers who visited Africa. Cynocephaly will pop up occasionally in other iconography as well. EJ, you're probably not Catholic enough to know this, but
not anymore.
Saint Christopher is sometimes depicted as canine-headed.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Let me show you this image because this is really fascinating.
Why?
So I'm curious. This is really testing your Catholic lore. But do you know why? Do you have any idea why Saint Christopher might sometimes be depicted as dog-headed?
I cannot come up with an idea.
Okay. It's probably a spelling error.
Really?
So get this, right? If you change one letter in the word Canaanite, you get canineite. Canineite.
Okay. Yeah.
Or dog person. Canineite.
Wow.
So the explanation is somebody probably fucked up a translation and the artist just kind of went along with it and made a dog-headed St. Christopher.
I love that. I love that. That's a theory?
Yeah.
That's great.
That's pretty much the prevailing theory, actually.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah. As someone who has had to deal with client feedback, I totally understand how that can happen. And eventually you just shift into the mode that's like, oh, no, dog-headed saint? Yep, okay. If that's what they want,
That's
fine.
what they want. This is going to be up permanently in the church on stained glass.
And it is. You can go to places and see this dog-headed St. Christopher and be like, okay, I guess.
This is the game of telephone gone very wrong. Or right, depending.
I mean, obviously now other cynocephali exist in mythology too. You have Anubis. It's probably the most obvious one,
I was thinking
right?
of Anubis. Mm-hmm. It's very Anubis connected.
Yeah,
it's so cool.
A jackal-headed Egyptian god of the underworld. You also have the dog-legged Adlet of Inuit mythology. The shaggy dog Baraks of the Turkic Mongol tribes. The twins Fuhisi and Ngua from Chinese mythology, who may have been dog-headed, but also may have just been ugly. Fringe cryptozoologists like to point to these various canine-headed humans and say that these are evidence of a race of dogmen known in antiquity but erased from the modern record. I don't really put much stock in that theory personally. It seems far more likely to me that the image of a person with a dog's head is just a ubiquitous icon in myth. Mm-hmm. It's a visual blending of civilization and wilderness, like a cross between human intelligence and animal savagery. And it's just so iconic that it's hard to ignore.
It is. I mean, we would wear bear heads and deer heads and elk heads and I don't know, into battle all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Shifting yourself, like calling upon this more bestial side. Embracing the savagery of nature, all of these things. As Godfrey and as other researchers tried to find more historical evidence of the dogman, they would start to dig up these things like dog-headed St. Christopher and say, oh, well, maybe there is evidence, but really seems like there's not a whole lot. Mm-hmm. Once again, ancient cultures had imaginations.
Yes, we forget this.
Yeah.
We really do. And that's a really important point, I think, to bring up. They had nothing but imaginations. They didn't have phones to fall into and drool over. And you know what I mean? They really, really used their minds and they had their distraction was their fantasy and their imagination.
Yeah, I always think it's funny that we will sit and we will watch Marvel movies, or we will watch, Lord of the Rings or The Witcher or whatever, and think that that's a modern contrivance, and people weren't doing that in the 13th century or the 9th century or antiquity, but they were.
They were, and they had nothing but time to do those things.
Exactly. So Godfrey continued her search into the Midwest dogmen, which had become her de facto beat at this point. And it's with her findings and the true origins of the Beast of Bray Road that we will conclude our series next time.
Cool. It was an owl.
It was not an owl. In all of the times that we do say that it's an owl.
No, this definitely.
It was not an owl.
Not an owl.
No, we're going to get away from owls for a little while.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
I like dogs. It's okay.
Do you have any theories?
I really think that it was, well, first of all, is mange, is it contagious?
Yes, it's a mite.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a small creature.
I think that it was a family of bears or a group of bears in the area, local to the area, that had mange.
One of the things that's interesting about this is that you have these couple of sightings and then it's maintained. And you actually see, and we haven't really talked about it yet because we've mostly just been focusing on Linda Godfrey's initial reporting. But the dogman sightings have a tendency to happen in 10-year intervals.
Oh, that's time for a disease to run its course. Come back?
Yes.
Oh, that's a
way.
Look. Oh, okay.
In a way.
Maybe a belief system to run its course.
Exactly. I mean, as we were talking about, diseases and these urban legends kind of follow the same morphology.
They do.
Yeah.
Also, I might say bear with mange, but I also think that like all explanations, I think is probably a bunch of things.
Right, and that's usually what happens, and it's one of the reasons that cryptozoology can be so fun and also so frustrating, because you get these die-hard cryptozoologists who say, well, sure, maybe one of the sightings was a bear with mange, but they couldn't all be a bear with mange.
Right. Exactly.
Which is true, and I'll
agree.
admit that,
I agree
right?
with that idea. Yes.
Right, and that's why I think it's interesting to explore the entirety of the legend and try to figure out not only what caused the initial sighting, but then also what helped to make it fester and grow and become this tapestry of mythology that it is now.
Right.
And part of that certainly was the Satanic Panic, as we discussed in this episode. Part of that is something that we're going to talk about in the next episode.
Oh, something we haven't discussed yet?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yep. Headed across the pond, not to England, but to another state.
Alaska?
No, Michigan.
Oh, across the pond. Oh, across the... Okay.
Very small pond.
You got me thinking
pond
very far.
that is Lake Michigan. I know we say across the pond to England, but no, to Michigan.
Okay. And also, I want people to know that Zuri sat on my lap the entire time.
She's so sweet.
She was a very good girl.
Yeah. She's not always, so this is great that she actually was.
She likes it when we talk about animals.
I think so. Yeah. Thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it, and catch up with you next time.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Be safe out there.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Slaying Monsters, the 40 in History podcast. If you like the podcast, there's a couple ways you can show your support. You can tell your friends, you can leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform, or you can head over to slayingmonsterspodcast.com and click on the Support Us button to leave a donation. For questions, suggestions, and other feedback, reach out to us, slayingmonsterspodcast@gmail.com, and stay up to date by following us on socials at Slaying Monsters Podcast. Your support helps us grow, and we are truly grateful to have our listeners and community.